Dan Rubenstein, we have a new national champion. Congratulations to the Ohio State Buckeyes. 34-23 is your final. Yes, they beat the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. We will talk about this game, every angle that we jotted down on our legal pads, and much, much more over the next 45 minutes to an hour or so.
Yes.
Good, sir. Welcome back here on the final evening of the season, the last game as the Buckeyes emerge victorious, my friend. How are you?
It doesn't matter how I am, Ty. People are not tuning in to hear what a sad Oregon human has to say about Ohio State Notre Dame. They're here to hear you. And people love you. People cherish you. People worship you.
All right. Stop licking the boots. It's okay. It's all right. We're going to make it through.
Okay. Here's how I am. I was worried we wouldn't have a good game. And then it turns out for a stretch, it seemed like we were going to have a good game, that there was momentum, that even though a first half gave us, an interesting start and then a wave of the other team starting out. And It seemed like we were heading to a dark place for the Notre Dame half of this universe, and an incredible tidal wave of joy for the Ohio State side of this universe, that we actually had two fan bases that were probably nervous at a very specific time in the middle of the fourth quarter of this game, which, again, as somebody who nobody in this fight for me, was pretty happy that we had that, the spirit of competition late.
I think that tracks. Yeah, I think that absolutely tracks. Look, this was a game that started off with a long 9-minute and 45-second drive, an 18-play, 75-yard drive with Notre Dame grinding away at that first quarter clock. Riley Leonard eventually punches it in to put Notre Dame up 7-zip. You're thinking, all right, Notre Dame's found a way to control the clock. This is the style of game that we talked about in our preview.
And
How
then,
do you want to play defense against Ohio State? You want to try and keep the offense off the field as best you can. Well, then Notre Dame stalls out in their next couple drives.
Before that, what happened to Riley Leonard after that first 9, almost 10-minute drive in which it was, I don't even know if it was Riley left and Riley right. It was Riley straight ahead.
Riley straight ahead. It was also Riley running to the sidelines and puking after that drive.
Not ideal in a moment as large that you have run your quarterback. I mean, I'm sure he was very enthusiastic about it, but into the ground to the point, even with that 7-0 lead, where some sort of mix of hits and adrenaline and nerves and the sweet, sweet cocktail that is life, he's puking up his guts on the sidelines, as per, I think, Holly Rowe reported that.
And then second quarter, that's when Ohio State started to get its act together. Touchdowns on, I believe, 4 consecutive drives. That put them up 28-7 at the start of the third quarter. Eventually 31-7 about midway through the third quarter. That's when Notre Dame started to chip away. They got 2 really nice Jaden Greathouse plays, one on a run from him as he broke a tackle, spun out of it, and then ran for a 34-yard touchdown pass. Then a second one, a beautiful drop in the bucket from Riley Leonard with about 4 minutes and 15 seconds left in the fourth quarter. Notre Dame had a chance at this one late, 3rd and long. Just so happens Will Howard spots up Jeremiah Smith, who was, relatively held in check for a good chunk of this game.
Yeah.
But he is manned up one-on-one with Christian Gray. He burns Christian Gray deep. Will Howard, a nice throw. That's pretty much what put this one on ice for the Buckeyes. Again, they win 34-23. Why don't we start here, Dan? And why don't I start with you, since I clearly am a biased third party in this matter?
And I feel like you are still buffering, right? You are still collecting your thoughts and your emotions and your takes for the game, for the season, for the Notre Dame side of things, for macro and micro decisions. You're still in it, Ty.
I don't want you to handle me with kid gloves, all right?
No, but what I'm saying
is, we're going to talk through this like the men that we are, okay?
Well, sometimes.
I am processing in real time. This
Correct.
is why I want to start with you with Ohio State. Ohio State went out. They did what they have been doing throughout this tournament, which is a fast start, which is scoring on their first drive, which is basically putting teams in this impossible riddle, which is, well, if you want to play the pass a little bit too much, we'll run it. Well, if you want to play the run a little bit too much, then we're going to pass it. Well, if you find a way to contain both, then Will Howard is going to do a little bit more with his legs. We saw a lot more of that from him this game against Notre Dame. It worked to great effect. I guess looking at the Ohio State side of things as compared to what you thought coming in when we did our preview episode last week, any surprises, any big takeaways? What comes to mind first when you think of the performance we saw from Ohio State tonight?
It's just variety from Ohio State. And even though, it wasn't a dominant rushing performance, but Ohio State opened up the second half with a 70-yard run from Quinshon Judkins. And the numbers won't sparkle and flash, but he was incredible running tough in the red zone, right? That they were timely on the ground, that it wasn't Jeremiah Smith highlight catch after highlight catch like it was against Oregon or Tennessee relatively early on. But obviously the threat of that was something that Notre Dame was contending with. And whether it was Carnell Tate or Brandon Innis or G. Scott once or twice, definitely Emeka Ibuka had at least a couple of drives where he was the guy for Ohio State. Not just the receiver, but he was the guy that things were opening up for him downfield or even in the intermediate or shorter space that he was able to turn into a little bit more. That it was the variety. It was Will Howard with his legs in timely moments. It was just very apparent that Ohio State's plan and confidence was just ahead of where Notre Dame was. I really liked what Notre Dame came out and did, where they're just like, you know what? We need to limit possessions here. We need to stack third and shorts, and it's very difficult to bring Riley Leonard down. And so we are going to try to dictate the rhythms of this game. It's not a strategy that is going to hold up against this kind of Ohio State team for 4 quarters. But if you're going to shorten the game and turn that 9-minute drive into 6, that's a win. Right off the bat, that's a win. So in terms of where Ohio State was, they weren't perfect. They obviously made mistakes in the secondary in this game, particularly in the second half with a couple holdings and PIs. The pass rush, obviously the defensive line for Ohio State, especially JTT, I think he got a sack, but he was hobbled and went down in the second half, but came back pretty quickly. Notre Dame just, I don't know if the moment was too big for the Irish early, but at no point, and I don't know if it was because of the size of the Rose Bowl and the size of the Cotton Bowl for Ohio State, they just seemed that emotionally and X's and O's wise and the ability to adjust, they were ready quicker. And Notre Dame got there in the second half that they knew that they had to throw, but Notre Dame didn't seem prepared to have a game plan for Jeremiah Love, especially either through the air or on the ground, whereas there was something very telling about Ohio State's plan for each individual player. And even when Ohio State was sort of going more conservative and trying to sit on a lead late and giving the ball back pretty quickly, and even when they coughed up, I think it was Emeka Ibuka who coughed up the fumble on the reverse, it was a long play. It was a long, successful play for Ohio State before that fumble. It wasn't a stuffed run, then the ball got stripped. And so Ohio State had such a great plan for an excellent Notre Dame defense that was basically, let's keep them on their toes, keeping it to the outside of the field with these receivers. And Will Howard was just pinpoint. What are you supposed to do when a guy starts out 14 of 15 against a great defense?
Yeah, Will Howard was really good. He had time to throw.
Yeah.
In my view, he was the player of the offense for this Ohio State team.
Sure.
His ability to make some hay on the ground before that long run by Quinshon Judkins. I guess if you take that 70-yard out of the equation, Will Howard would have been the team's leading rusher. He had 16 carries for 57 yards. He was sensational through the air. What was striking to me, actually, for large chunks of this game, maybe not so much in the first half, but definitely down the stretch, Ohio State almost reverted to a Notre Dame style of offense in this one, where they were using a lot of Will Howard, where they were focusing a little bit more on misdirection and trying to do some ground and pound stuff. I mean, the pass was there. For sure, it was there. Clearly, Will Howard had a lot of success through the air, but there were definitely chunks of this one, especially later on, where it felt like I was watching a little bit of what I saw this season from Notre Dame, and they were using that to just maintain possession, to wind the clock, to avoid mistakes, that sort of thing. And it worked. They were able to hold on. The other thing that jumped out to me, I think, in the Ohio State side was really the interesting chess match that we saw early. They talked about it a little bit on the broadcast, and I know we gave specific mention of Notre Dame's man defense in our preview. We've really been talking about it all season long, certainly in this playoff. But the ability for Ohio State to diagnose what Notre Dame was doing. I think it was Herbie on the broadcast who said that they were mixing things up. Even Ryan Day said it at halftime. They were mixing things up. They were playing man, then they were playing zone, then they were playing man, they were playing zone. They were mixing it up a lot more than they would normally, breaking a huge tendency of theirs, which was playing a lot of cover one, a lot of man across the board with the roaming safety. They were very much following that Texas playbook, at least to the extent that Notre Dame could, which was playing a little bit more zone, trying to keep receivers in front of you, try to avoid getting burnt by the deep pass. For a good chunk of this game, they did that.
Right.
They didn't do it on a big third down late, which essentially sealed the deal. That one went to Jeremiah Smith for 56 yards, whatever it was, to get them down near the goal line. But I thought Notre Dame had a pretty good game plan, at least in theory, for trying to mix things up and prevent against that big passing play. But Ohio State, to your point, had a really good game plan to try and answer, which was, we're going to run the ball. If you leave an edge unguarded, we're going to let Will Howard run it. It's really just the riddle that we have been talking about with Ohio State that I mentioned at the top here. You do one thing, you overcommit to one thing, they have two other ways that they can beat you. And frankly, there weren't a whole lot of defenses. There were no defenses throughout this tournament, and probably not many in college football that can handle that, especially when they are playing this effectively, this productively. That's the thing. They didn't get to this point until after that Michigan game. And at that point, they found this next gear, and they just cruised through the competition.
Yeah, there was just nothing for Notre Dame on the ground in this one. I talked about figuring out ways to get Jeremiah Love involved, and what did he end up with, like 4 carries for 3 yards in this game?
Yeah, I mean, this is very much a Notre Dame team that was not built for this moment. And by this moment, this is not me saying that they weren't built to be in a national championship game. They weren't built to play against a team like an Ohio State. They weren't built to be down this much this soon, to have to turn it over to Riley Leonard to start throwing. Now, obviously, Riley had some success later on in this game. It was too little too late, but they were able to make some big plays down the field. They were able to find some of those chunk plays that we talked about in our preview, albeit for not, they end up losing by 11. But at least in the early going, it did seem like it took them a little bit to try and figure out, all right, what is the new game plan here? Another thing they mentioned on the broadcast, I think it was Chris Fowler talking about how he was mystified by how little they were using Jeremiah Love. And it wasn't even like they were using him in the passing game. He was open, by the way, on that series where they ended up kicking a field goal, puzzlingly so, trying to kick the field goal to make it a 2-score.
Yeah,
I don't know what that was. Mitch Jeter doinks it. Jeremiah Love open in the flat for what looked to be a walk-in touchdown. He missed him on that one, Riley did. But other than that, Jeremiah Love was relatively quiet in this one because they were down so much so soon that they could not rely on their running game, to really even gnaw their way back into this thing. It was too big of a mountain to climb, even for the running game.
I was really impressed, by the way, on that same token, that Ohio State came out. I think it was Quinshon Judkins lined up out wide early on for here's a quick 8, right? Here's a quick 7 or 8 that Jeremiah Love wasn't used like that, or Jadarian Price wasn't used like that. Like, here's something easy, because Riley Leonard, if nothing else, especially after that first drive, I don't know if he was emotionally gassed. I don't know if he was physically gassed. I suppose, he's a national championship caliber quarterback. He is in shape. He is ready to roll. He has beaten good teams. But those next 2 drives that they just seemed so off, and he seemed skittish throwing the ball. He was almost trying to guide the ball instead of just throwing easy crossers and screens that he was missing, wasn't reading well. He was being protected pretty well, I thought, and he was just late processing, late to guys, and it didn't seem like there were a ton of back-breaking penalties for Notre Dame or for either one of these teams. Obviously, there wasn't back-breaking even with those defensive holding and
they had the big one on RJ Oben, the roughing the passer.
But that was a fumble drive. That was the same drive as the fumble.
Yeah. But it was, there were a couple penalties early in their first 3 drives, their second drive in particular, where they had, 2 penalties that set them back, put them off schedule. I think there was a penalty on the ensuing drive as well.
Right.
It was not a game beyond that, though, that was crippling in terms of the fouls, right? I mean, they were able to, I think, maintain some degree of discipline. And it was really just this riddle, again, of trying to solve what Ohio State was doing and not so much beating themselves, at least not with penalties. Now, there were passes in this game that, especially early, that Riley Leonard missed. I also talked about the one later with Jeremiah Love where it seemed as if that could have been a score.
Yep.
Didn't work out. Riley, I think, came to his senses later in this one. Early, he was pretty jazzed up. And it probably took a while to recuperate after that opening drive. He definitely got it together later, was able to move the ball down the field. Jaden Greathouse had another great game.
He did. Excellent
for
game.
Notre Dame, 6 for 128, 2 touchdowns, a great catch, a great run. I mean, really making a name for himself over these last 2 games. But at least before that, there were definite moments where you wondered if the passing game was ever going to get itself on track because it just didn't seem like he was comfortable. He wanted to run it. But when he wanted to run it, when it wasn't a designed run, Ohio State was there. When he wanted to look down the field, he had guys open in some cases where he was just missing the throws to Chris Mitchell and whatnot. So there are definitely going to be some things on tape that they look at and they wish they had back. I don't know if any of those things necessarily put them over the hump here. Right. I still think Ohio State was the better team. But there were a couple of those that if you're a Notre Dame fan, certainly if you're a Notre Dame player, you're going to go back and say, aha, that's one we'd like to have back.
Yeah, especially early on, obviously Ohio State's coming out and they're first. I'm not going to play Dvorak, but it was touchdown, field goal. They were up 21-7 at halftime. Obviously, they killed it with the middle 8.
Yeah.
I thought the Notre Dame defense, all things considered.
Yeah.
Like the corners, look, Christian Gray got burned in the biggest moment of the game. He did. And he got burned by a player who's going to burn every corner these next 2 years before. I mean, he should be in the NFL next year, but he's got 2 more years of eligibility before he can be in Jeremiah Smith. They weren't being muscled out for 50-50 balls. They weren't being mossed. This wasn't a Notre Dame team with like a killer edge rusher or anything all year long. I think was it Josh Burnham who had a couple sacks?
Yeah, Josh Burnham had the 2 sacks. And look, this is a defensive line that's been pretty nicked up. It really hurt losing Riley Mills when they did back in the playoff, right? I mean, that was a big-time blow because he led their team in sacks. He was a huge presence in the middle, not just a run stopper, but obviously somebody who could be disruptive in the passing game as well. You lose a guy like that, they had able-bodied replacements step in and I think do a pretty good job, but it just changes the dynamics so much of what you can do up front.
It's also, so with those touchdowns, part of that is also Notre Dame's offense in terms of complementary football on the field for a minute and change, those second and third drives. I think they netted -4 yards on those second and third drives. And that just puts your own defense in a tough position. You're going to get more tired legs. And I thought Ohio State was just more on time. They didn't crush Notre Dame up front. They were just more on time. This is when an in-breaking route is supposed to be open. Will Howard's throwing it on time. He's confident that whoever it is, Carnell Tate or Emeka Ibuka, is going to be there when he's supposed to be there. And once again, this wasn't Notre Dame guys being torched for the most part. Notre Dame was setting the edge. Ohio State was they have really strong players who were well developed and had a great game plan and were better. There was something that like you could feel like the weight almost coming off of Riley Leonard's shoulders once they were down like they were. Yeah. When he was like, let's just throw the ball downfield to Mitchell Evans and Jaden Greathouse, and let's see what they can do. Up the sideline, the middle of the field seemed to be more successful. I think Mitchell Evans had a 33-yard catch that was shedding a couple tackles, faked a guy out, and was super impressive. It came down to moments, and whether it was those third downs that Will Howard was able to pick up with his legs, the fake punt, it was a good call, and it was well executed until a drop. It was a good enough pass to keep that drive going.
They should have just run a normal play if they were going to do that. But fair point. I mean, outside of that weird field goal decision by Marcus Freeman late, which, just to reiterate, it was a 2-possession game. They were down 16 points. They decide, it seemed like it was a hurried decision. It didn't seem like anybody was thinking this thing through. But they're down 16. they elect that they're going to send the field goal unit out there to kick the field goal and I guess keep it as a 2-score game.
Yeah, you need 2 touchdowns. You just
need 2
need 2
touchdowns
touchdowns to take the lead, tie, whatever.
So it was a strange decision. Mitch Jeter ends up doinking it off the left upright. It didn't go for 3 points. But, to your point on the third down efficiency for Ohio State, this was, I think, an emerging storyline early. 9 of 12 on third down for the Buckeyes. At one point, they were 6 for 6. It just felt like the Notre Dame defense could not get off the field. It wasn't until, I think, a little bit later on in this game when Al Golden started to dial up some pressure.
Yeah.
Started to try and make Will Howard be a bit uncomfortable. Up until that point, they had done it sparingly. It seemed as if they felt they could play some coverage against this Ohio State passing attack. It didn't really work that well. Will Howard was able to pick his spots. Once they made him a little bit more uncomfortable, once they were, I think, finding their way a bit more with the running game, or guarding against the running game, I should say, it seemed like things balanced out a little bit at that point, but it still remained this huge puzzle to solve because, again, you've got this 3-headed monster. How do you stop all three? Will Howard, the rushing game, as well as the passing game. So I think Notre Dame did about as well as it could once it had a chance to settle in late.
Right.
Clearly, they were able to hold Ohio State, in the dying moments of this game, within striking distance. There was the big pass play to Jeremiah Smith when they burnt Christian Gray. But the Notre Dame defense put itself in a position to make some plays to give the offense an opportunity to score some points. It just wasn't enough in the end. Ohio State with 445 total yards in this one. They outgained Notre Dame by about 150 yards. So it's 445 to 308, give or take. Notre Dame with more passing yards. Obviously, they had to throw for the majority of the second half. Clearly, Ohio State with a lot more on the ground, 214 to 53. In my view, that was sort of the difference.
Right.
Their effectiveness on the ground, interestingly enough, not a unit that we look at and say, that's a great rushing team.
Right.
Still don't think they're a great rushing team, Dan, but they have guys who stepped up, won the moments. Quinshon Judkins, a big run, some tough runs in the red zone. Trey Henderson showing his burst. Will Howard showing a little bit more on the ground than we've seen this season. This has been a story, I think, throughout the playoff as well. Not a team we've associated this year with having an electric ground attack.
Should be noted, left tackle goes down during the Oregon game. First round left tackle and Josh Simmons. Seth McLaughlin before the Penn State game, I believe.
Absolutely.
Everybody's beat up at this point, but that does affect things, of course.
It does affect things, but they were more than good enough to use that running game to their advantage here.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. It was a fascinating back and forth in that first half, and I think it was the first touchdown, just in terms of pure play design, that it was Jeremiah Smith lined up one-on-one with Christian Gray, I believe, at the top of our TV screens.
I did not like the Gray versus Smith matchup. There was a lot of that.
I don't know how big Gray is. I know Leonard Moore is a bigger. He's also a freshman. 6'2" or something, right?
I really would have preferred it be Leonard Moore. And we did see a little bit of that early. It ended up being Christian Gray in some of the key moments. And it was clear that whether Gray was on Ibuka, whether he was on Jeremiah Smith, he was the guy that they were going after.
On that first touchdown, I was just going to mention the play design was great. It was when you saw the reverse angle, Christian Gray was like, something is up. I should have help. Something is up. I should have help.
Yep.
And it was a fake reverse swing pass to Jeremiah Smith.
Nice pass.
Had nobody near him. It was a great play design. It was great execution. And Ohio State also left, was it Carnell Tate who had the sort of the sluggo that he was overthrown?
Yes.
For, I don't know if that was Gray or Leonard Moore on that one. But, good play design, good execution there. And so Will Howard was just not off at all in this game. And, there's a formula for beating this version of Ohio State doesn't matter anymore. The season's done. This team is done. But I do wonder what Notre Dame with Riley Mills, healthy Howard Cross, whatever, because that's literally it. You have to have an overwhelming defensive line to have a chance against this version of Ohio State. And Notre Dame, I don't know what they look like in week 7 when everybody was healthy with Riley Mills and everything.
Well, they haven't been healthy all year.
Right.
They really haven't been healthy all year, right? I mean, they lost Jordan Botelho very early on in this one.
Yeah.
They've been licking their wounds since almost the preseason, if you want to go back to some of their injuries along the offensive line.
Yeah.
So this has been, as I said in the last episode, kind of the story of the year for this team. Outside of that NIU loss in week 2,
Sure.
it's been dealing with injuries and rebounding from them as they continue to pile on.
By the way, I don't know. He may have had a penalty, Jag, you saw at left tackle.
Right.
Riley Leonard was like, when he would take his drops and step into the pocket, if he were throwing on time and in rhythm, he was kept pretty clean. This wasn't a Notre Dame offensive line that was taken advantage of by, I know you going into the game, you were worried about Tyleik Williams.
Yeah.
This wasn't a collapsing pocket consistently. This wasn't, I mean, obviously the Ohio State front did a great job against Notre Dame on the ground, but in terms of pushing this offensive line around in the passing game, especially in the second half, Notre Dame's offensive line, patchwork as it was, kind of held up fine.
I thought it held up fine, and I thought they held up fine, given the deficit that they had to try and crawl out of.
Yeah.
This has been one of the characteristics of this team that we have seen on display a couple times through the playoff, sparingly throughout the year, where they face a little bit of adversity and they find ways to win moments.
Mm-hmm.
And with them being down 24 points relatively late in this game, there was no give up in this team at all. There was no give up. They weren't punting in weird fourth down situations.
Correct.
They were leaving it all out there on the field. And I thought Riley Leonard rose to the moment. I thought Jaden Greathouse, you mentioned Mitchell Evans. I thought as a collective, they were very good at trying to keep themselves in this football game. They didn't win. I think the better team won.
Definitely.
But I do think Notre Dame deserves some credit for fighting this one tooth and nail to the very bitter end.
College football's number one loser, Notre Dame.
Number one loser.
In
the
there.
runner-up.
Yeah.
The runner-up. I think it says a lot about this coaching staff, and I think it's, in a sense, emblematic of the season, because after that NIU loss, it would have been easy for many of the guys in this team to give up the vision of maybe making a tournament like this or even making it this deeply in the tournament. The fact that they made it here at all really is a pretty good story for them and something that they can build on. I think Notre Dame will be fine. They do lose a fair amount next season, but we'll deal with that in due course, Dan. I give Marcus Freeman, the staff, the players a lot of credit for the way they were able to hang with Ohio State in this one down the stretch when it felt like things could be out of hand.
Mm-hmm.
Alas, though, I think the better team wins. The better team wins, again, 34-23. At least we got a relatively good game out of it in the end.
It felt decent near the end. There was a long stretch where I imagine Ohio State fans felt like things were just coasting, and Notre Dame fans were in their feelings about how the rhythms went.
Both teams finished 14-2, 16 games apiece.
Yes,
for both of these schools, which is a lot. That's more than we're used to.
Right.
I think it's pretty clear where Marcus Freeman is at now. Marcus Freeman in year 3, making the national championship, recruiting well, seemingly has a lot of forward momentum with this program. Going to have a new quarterback, going to have a bunch of new faces next year. But there aren't a whole lot of people who cover the sport as closely as you and I around the country that think Notre Dame is anything other than a top 10 team going into next season. They appear to have a lot in place for a sustained run at this playoff, maybe more cracks at a national championship. The same is definitely true for Ohio State.
I was like, should we talk about the winning team and the narrative surrounding the Buckeyes? Yeah.
That is where I'm going with this, because that I think is the more interesting angle. Ohio State loses to Michigan. First off, they lose to your Oregon Ducks on the road by 1 point.
Is that so? Okay.
Then, say what you want about the NIU loss back in week 2 for Notre Dame. The most inexplicable upset from my vantage point all season was Ohio State with 13 weeks to prepare, with 13 weeks of tape, knowing exactly what this Michigan team was, only scoring 10 points and losing that rivalry.
Wow.
I don't know how that happened. I don't know what the game plan was. That, to me, is the most confusing thing I saw all season long, full stop.
Yeah.
Clearly, there is a lot attached to that game. There's a lot of weight that's been on the shoulders of Ryan Day as a result of losing yet another one to Michigan.
Yep.
For them to rebound, come back through the tournament, maul everybody they played, and end up winning this tournament. That is a redemption arc for Ryan Day, is it not?
It absolutely is.
We did a show with Ari Wasserman, our friend from On3, from Andy and Ari. I remember in the immediate aftermath of that Michigan game, and you and I talked through, there are clips out there, you can go and find them on the social channels, talking through what does this mean for Ryan? Where does Ohio State go from here? It felt like almost just lost and wayward and more soul-searching. Ryan Day had talked about how this was like roughly equivalent to losing family members. I mean, it was a big deal for them to lose this game and to struggle with Michigan. To now come back and win this title, I think says a lot about him. Obviously, it's the first page of the bio for him.
Mm-hmm.
That, to me, I think if we take a step back as we talk about this now, as we enter the offseason, is sort of where my mind goes first, just that redemption arc for Day.
I mean, he has the opportunity to do the funniest thing now and just leave the Ohio State job. And I don't know if there are any open NFL jobs at the time we're recording this, if like the Saints or whoever is still open. No, he's not going to leave Ohio State, at least not now, not for any opportunities available as we can see them right now. An incredible redemption arc for Ryan Day and Ohio State. And, they put up the stats about the coaches all time with the best winning percentage, having coached a minimum of 50 games. Like, he's had an incredible run and has also lost 4 straight games to Michigan. It's this incredibly unique situation where he's so very clearly excellent and one of the top coaches in this sport that are currently coaching, that have coached recently. You can't really in good faith argue otherwise unless you are very specifically an Ohio State fan who has a lot of, understandably so, emotion wrapped up in the Michigan rivalry. Again, understandably so. It's just wild to think about the unique nature of both being excellent and losing 4 in a row to a rival. And that's college football. Obviously, we have situations like this, but it is wild to think about that Ohio State, and this is one of the, I would argue, great things about sports and sports that have longer seasons, is it allows teams to have seasons that are living, breathing things that if you're an NBA team, you can lose 6 games in a row and it's not the end of the world because it's March and you have time to figure things out. And you're like, oh, this guy was hurt. Oh, we were in our head about this. Oh, the shooting went cold, or our hitting went cold for a baseball team. That it is a good thing for a team to have a down stretch and figure it out and dig their way out of it. That's a good thing. We've just never had that in this sport. We've just never had an organized postseason that allows for that kind of breathing room. And so in the last decade, since Ohio State last won a national championship against America's team, my big, beautiful Oregon Ducks in the 2014 season, which I think they lost their opener to Virginia Tech. I want to say that was the year in which they lost that game. But to have 2 losses, if this were a literal year ago, Ohio State's not in this conversation for being in this.
Nor is Notre Dame.
Postseason.
Neither team in last year's setup would be in the tournament.
And Notre Dame at least is closer to it. But yes, they would have had an egregious loss when you started comparing resumes, and not crazy impressive wins as much as Texas A&M at least had a moment kind of 2/3 of the way into the year before fading. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We would have had, Georgia and Texas and Penn State and Oregon, or some combination. Who knows what exactly a 4-team playoff looks like, because that's not the reality in which we live. It's just wild to think about that we have this playoff for a few different reasons, I guess, right? It's more access to teams, but it's also going to advantage teams that are built like and have seasons like Ohio State, that have the depth to bounce back, have the wherewithal to bounce back, have the coaching quality, the coordinators, the assistants to diagnose and bounce back and to fulfill their potential, even though in the last 150 years, if you lose the way that they lost to Michigan and are not playing for a conference championship, which is, of course, a new part of this sport, relatively speaking, that Ohio State's not in this position to prove that, at least at their best, they're better than everybody, because this would have been a team in some sort of second tier bowl game, and they would have blown somebody out, maybe, depending on who does or does not opt out.
Right.
And we could have had that conversation, I guess, like we did with the Ohio State team that lost to Michigan State team, and Zeke is, sick and not getting carries, and Urban Meyer, like, that was a similar situation. But this new system affords breathing room, which we want the best team to win. How we define that moving forward is going to be interesting, but 2 losses now is okay. There is now a blueprint, and I don't know how quickly we're going to change this tournament, but we are in a world in which we allow a do-over, we allow a mulligan, and that's just something we all have to make peace with, because Ohio State proved it on the field.
I want to keep the focus on Ohio State. I want to keep the focus on Notre Dame, since these are the 2 teams that we're in.
Yes,
but I will say, if we zoom out a second, we know, because we have seen the comments that have come into us throughout the course of the year, in the year leading up to this year, with respect to this new 12-team format. It's different.
Mm-hmm.
It's different. It's very different from what a lot of us are used to. Even for you and I mean, we went like 3 weeks without knowing what day it was, because they're playing these games on days other than Saturday.
Yeah, true.
And our whole world is built around Saturdays for like 6 months out of the year. I mean, it threw us all for a loop. I do think in retrospect, it was, if nothing more, very interesting. It added an element of intrigue to the postseason. You may not like the fact that a 2-loss team is crowned national champion or even allowed into this tournament. That is your prerogative.
Right. Or Boise had a bye, or ASU had a bye. Yeah, of course.
There are parts of this that I think we all can point to and say, that should be fixed, that could be tweaked, that needs to be honed. Nothing needs to be in its final perfect state the first time through.
Right.
Okay. And this definitely is no exception. But I see the numbers for our show. And I can tell you, just based on the traction that we got over the last month and a half, there was real interest in this playoff. There was real
it's year
tangible
one
interest in this playoff.
Year one, of course.
Year one. And we're going to take some time, I'm sure, this offseason to go through and evaluate if and when there was a drop-off in terms of that fan interest, where maybe they can make some tweaks to, I guess, improve the product for people, to make sure that the most people are watching, at least to keep it entertaining for everybody who likes college football. But if nothing more, the data that I have suggests that it was interesting. And I tend to agree. Now, I wanted this from the start. And maybe I'm, again, a biased third party here. But I do think, if nothing more, I know we had some blowouts. I know it's not perfect, and I know it still isn't for everybody. But definitely, it did make things interesting down the stretch. And for that, I am grateful, because before this, it was a lot of bowl games that, frankly, were exhibitions with a ton of opt-outs. We at least got to see what I think was a pretty high-level tournament. So that was new, and that was cool.
And we're still talking about a bowl slate that mostly had no Pop-Tarts. There was a Pop-Tart game.
There was a Pop-Tart
but
game.
mostly no Pop-Tarts.
That's right.
So that's something that probably needs to be reconfigured. We just need more tasty toaster. I don't even like Pop-Tarts. I don't know why I'm saying tasty.
Where are we going with
I like
this?
the concept of Pop-Tarts.
There you go.
No, I think you're right. No, it's wild to think about, just because of the length of these schedules and how the sport is calibrated with portal stuff, with NIL stuff, that like the razor's edge at which both of these teams operated. That we talked about this a little bit on the preview, that like, all right, what if Mike Elko's like, I don't want to go to College Station, I'm going to stick around, and Riley Leonard's happy in Durham. And same goes for like, what if Kansas State didn't fully make it clear that they were ready to move on to Avery Johnson, and Will Howard's NFL draft grades weren't as good as he had hoped. And like, there's so many moving parts with all of this. And like, or if Ohio State is in the Big Ten championship game because they don't lose that Michigan game. And there's just there's so much that I think the committee and the people behind the scenes at the college football playoff have to figure out with how the postseason is organized. It was year one. I have no faith that they're going to be able to do it. They're going to change things either this coming year or the next year when it goes to 14 teams. And there are just going to be unforeseen circumstances because it's an impossible job, obviously. But this is where we are now as a sport, where so much is changing and the schedule is so crazy that the ability to navigate like Ohio State did, and people are going to quickly point out like, hey, they spent $20 million. That smooths over everything. And I think I agree with our friend Roger Sherman. We're like, that's kind of a deal. $20 million for a championship winning roster. I think he compared it to what like the fifth best NBA player on an average team is making, and you can win a college football national championship in a $1 billion industry. Kind of a deal. So yes, of course, money smooths a turbulent sport over quite nicely. But to be able to weather players leaving, players coming in, new teams coming into your conference, and everybody trying to figure out how to best position themselves for success, both during the regular season and an expanded postseason. I think it's kind of obvious that you have to tip your cap to both Notre Dame and to a further extent, obviously, Ohio State within a conference and dealing with what they've dealt with behind the scenes emotionally with the Michigan stuff, that like they were built for it. Somehow, some way, they weren't built to beat Michigan, but they were built to win a national championship, which is wild to think about. But like the fortitude that kind of thing takes,
it's crazy.
It's
a good
super
season.
Impressive.
Yeah, it's an impressive season. I think the way that they bounced back from that Michigan loss is a credit to Ryan Day. Honestly, it would have been easy for this team to fall apart. I listened to some of the post-game commentary from Quinshon Judkins. Yes, it's Judkins, not Junkins, the way that Kirk Herbstreit
was he dipping into it? Nah. No.
Oh, man, he just kept going. He just kept going. The Junkins. I looked on the pronunciation guide to make sure I wasn't crazy. It's Judkins.
Yeah, it is Judkins, of course.
I listened to him talk. I listened to Will Howard talk. Everybody talks about the brotherhood that these guys have had and how they wanted to win this one for Ryan Day. So kudos to him. I feel happy for him. I know he was definitely feeling the heat after that Michigan loss, and that's been a few years running. So for him to kind of bounce back in this capacity has been pretty cool and definitely been a good story.
Also, I wish for all of the college football brotherhoods to have the ability to add Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs to your roster.
Help. Yes, that helps. Absolutely.
I wish that all of your rosters and all of the tightly knit locker rooms are also able to add generational safeties and receivers to really give you that extra boost. And I don't say that in a mocking tone. Like, that's just helpful. It's very helpful for a roster.
Oh my gosh. Speaking of tightly knit.
Yes.
If I could offer this personal anecdote.
I'm ready.
We talked about on, I guess it was our last show, the credentials didn't work out for us this time around. We wanted to go to the game.
Yeah.
In hindsight, I'm glad I didn't, because I probably would have been a nervous wreck.
Yeah.
Having to be quiet in the sterile press box might not have been the best setting for me in this game. So
well, when you look at the news organizations, the very serious and rigorous news organizations covering this game, casinos, obviously.
Sure.
You tip your cap, right, Ty?
I harbor no ill will. Okay?
Your fan duels, your draft kings. Continue.
Where I'm going with this is I wish it would have been a different outcome, as I am donning my Notre Dame gear, but I am grateful that for the first time in what feels like forever, it's been over 2 years since I got to watch a big Notre Dame game with Mama H.
Oh, that's true.
We used to watch all these games together, and our schedule is pretty grueling during the season. We're recording late at night, and it makes it almost impossible to watch some of these big ones a half hour away from here. So in this event, we didn't do the watch along stream. We didn't do any of the antics that we've been doing throughout the course of the playoff. You were kind enough to kind of give me the night off from that.
Oh, that's cool.
And it kind of allowed me to go up there and watch a game with her. So I wish it would have been different, but it was cool to kind of do that again, because truly we used to watch all of them together. There were definitely numerous F-bombs thrown at the television.
And from you too.
And for me too. Yeah. It gets grueling. It does get grueling. But we had an intense watch session, and it was it was good to be able to kind of renew that. So,
and she held up okay. We have like a proof of like
she
mental
did.
health and
I was a little bit worried because after you and I did the Twitter space that we did,
yeah.
I was in my old bedroom and I came out and Mama H was sound asleep in her chair. And I was trying to wake her because it was kickoff. And for a moment, I was afraid she was dead.
Yeah.
She just was not budging at all. And I'm think the thought comes to mind, like, the game didn't even start yet. I understand after the game, but before the game, I mean, you got to make it through. Then she woke up. We're all good. But alas, I was glad I had that experience.
I'm glad.
I hope everybody out there got to watch it with a close friend or somebody you care about, because it makes the whole thing a whole lot better. Not to get too deep with this. So
no, I watched it and got to do a press conference for a 6-year-old. Got to answer about 7,700 questions.
Great.
In that only the first half. It was bedtime at halftime, but
Great.
it was just like, so Oregon's the number one because they were one going into the playoff. I was like, yeah, but not anymore, because whoever wins this game is going to be number one. And I was like, but Oregon beat Ohio State, and I was like, I don't have the emotional energy to go through this live.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was happy I got to watch it with him, answering a bunch of questions. And
it's cool.
Like the name Price came up, and he was like, "Price of what?" I was like, "Okay,
time for bed. Time for bed.
It's time for bed. Let's get you some dessert." But yes, it was a fun watch, and I'm glad you got to share that.
Yeah, it was cool. I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for everybody out there who took this ride with us this season. It was a crazy year, man. It was a wide open season. We had a ton of fun covering it. It's certainly a lot in the throes of the season when you got upsets, when you got all these games going on concurrently. But
yeah,
I just want to thank our Verballerhood that has continued to support us, that has grown with us here over the last 6 months or so. It's been
definitely
a great ride for us. Thank you to everybody behind the scenes who helps us keep things afloat, whether it's reverbs, whether it's our Discord server, whether it's things on the business end or cutting videos, or you name it. It takes a bit of a village here to make sure that everything stays afloat. So we're really grateful for that as well. We will be with you throughout the course of the off season. We will certainly tweak the schedule here and there, try to give the vocal cords a little bit of a chance to recuperate. But alas, congratulations to the Ohio State Buckeyes. The Ohio State Buckeyes finished as your national champion 34-23 with a mark of 14-2. And per our friend Brett McMurphy, they are now the favorite to win in the 2025 season with 5-1 odds.
What are give me the odds for next year?
Here is what it looks like. Ohio State is your favorite at 5-1 to be the national champion next season. Georgia Bulldogs at 6-1. Your Oregon Ducks 6.5-1.
Sure.
Texas at 7-1. Penn State at 9-1. Alabama at 12. Notre Dame at 17-1. And then just to round things out, Clemson at 20, LSU, Ole Miss, and Tennessee at 25, A&M at 30, Michigan at 40. Not a horrible bet, to be honest with you.
No.
Auburn and Miami at 50-1. South Carolina and USC at 60, Florida at 80, Nebraska and Oklahoma at 100. We get to do this whole thing over again, my friend.
Could be what? Jim Knowles at Oklahoma next year? That was the rumor going into the game?
All sorts of rumors, man. Could be Al Golden with the Cincinnati Bengals. Could be Mike Mickens taking over defense. There's a lot going on, man. There's a lot. We'll have plenty of time, I'm sure, to dissect all of this and much more.
By the way, just on the topic of 2025, Ohio State opens with Texas. Yes?
Yes. Right.
They open with Texas Saturday, August 30th. They're on the road at Washington. Could be a little bit dicey. We'll see. That Illinois returns a ton, and they're on the road in Champaign. At Wisconsin, we'll see. And at Michigan, of course, to conclude their season. Notre Dame opens the year at Miami. So that'll be a Carson Beck, a hopefully healthy Carson Beck Miami. They host Texas A&M at home. They have Boise State at Arkansas. They're not playing Boise State at Arkansas, obviously. They have Boise State. They travel to Arkansas the week before that. USC is in South Bend. Back half of the schedule seems to open up a little bit, but they are at Pitt and at Boston College. So an interesting first half of the season.
Oh, yeah.
For Notre Dame next year. At Miami, Texas A&M, at Arkansas, Boise, USC.
Yep.
New quarterback. Big Ten should be fun. we'll see on Notre Dame. And I guess at this point, what was the old like campaigning on trains? The Whistle Stop Tour.
Yeah.
Jody and I will be doing an Oregon, Michigan, what it's like to beat Ohio State tour. So look for us across this great land. And a unique marriage of beating the national champion and it not really mattering at all. In fact, one of us got absolutely destroyed in a game against the national championship recently. But no, fun year. Should be an incredible experience moving forward to see where the hell this sport is going.
Why don't we leave it there? Again, we thank you all so much for your ongoing support. Please check us out at verballers.com. If you made it this far, hit follow or subscribe.
Yes.
We will continue reminding you to do that. If you've already done so, please do us a favor and tell your friends as well. We're always trying to grow the Verballerhood. We will be back soon. Make sure you stay tuned to those audio feeds, those social feeds, so that you're fully up to date with what our schedule looks like moving forward. In the meantime, though, Ohio State 34.
Yes.
Notre Dame 23. Ohio State is your national champions. The first national champion in the expanded 12-team playoff era.
One of 2 years of the 12-team playoff era. Yeah.
For that guy over there, my good friend Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildebrandt, thank you all so very, very much. We'll talk to you all soon. Stay solid.
Peace.